I now give the floor to the representative of Russian Federation, Dmitry.
Thank you, Mr. President. Спасибо.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank the Undersecretary General, Ms. Rosemary DiCarlo. I'd like to thank the head of the EU delegation, Mr. Olaf Skog, and the 2231 format coordinator, the permanent representative of Belgium, Mr. Philippe Credelco. Thank them all for their briefings. The past year has been far from easy from all of us, and it's not just about the coronavirus. Since June of this year, the United States have been making attempts to punish Iran at any price, well, rather than Iran, the inconvenient regime there, that is, and these attempts have taken on an increasingly reckless nature, removed from common sense. Our partners from Washington tried to compel Security Council members to introduce a new resolution against Iran, which without any convincing justification would introduce an unprecedentedly strict embargo, or they claimed that they had the right to unilaterally reimpose the UN sanctions against Iran that used to be in existence prior to 2015, in other words, to launch the so-called snapback. And the screws on Iran is something that our American partners have been tightening basically every other day, trying to convince themselves and the world outside that the maximal pressure on Iran was the only way of resolving all issues. And all of these attempts failed. I would like to underscore that this was one of those rare instances in Security Council where, in counteraction to these attempts, all of the members of the Security Council showed remarkable unity. And this was a very good illustration of the fact that even though that we have nuances in our assessment of the Iran dossier in the Council, including on JCPOA, nonetheless, all of them paled in comparison with the absurd and destructive nature we've seen from the United States in the past 6 months, where they basically pitted themselves against all other members of the Security Council. To the Council's honor, the Council did not give in to Washington and acted exactly the way it should have, standing by the international law, its commitments to strengthen international peace and security, and strictly going by the letter and the spirit of 2231 and common sense in general. We are proud to say that the Security Council prestige over these 6 months has only grown as regards the Iranian dossier. Since the snapback did not materialize, the international legal regime we have and Resolution 2231 is fully maintained. The document itself is continued being realized, implemented in line with the parameters and timelines it contains. The illegitimacy of the American claims to introduce snapback is something that 13 members of Security Council mentioned. And the presidents of the Council in August and September stated unequivocally that they were not considered themselves to be in a position to do anything in pursuance of that request. This was also the same position which was taken unequivocally by the Secretary General. The Russian Federation, when we assumed the presidency of the Council on the 1st of October, also stated publicly that the snapback did not materialize. And then lastly, the ministers of foreign affairs of JCPOA countries put a full stop in this issue as recently as yesterday in their joint statement of the 21st of December. These are facts. Whether or not our American colleagues like them is a different issue. But this is reality which came out of a collective political will displayed by the majority of Security Council members, and they will have to accept that. Another element which is inconvenient for our American colleagues is the fact that the 18th of October was the expiration date for the special procedure for arms supplies into or out of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Mr. President, we regret that the process of psychological adaptation to this reality is something that's clearly taking a long time on the part of our colleagues. And we can see the phantom pains of this in the 5th Committee of the General Assembly. There, the American delegation these days is trying to enshrine in the draft UN budget for the next year funding for a sanction committee which only exists in their imagination. And we do hope that most members of the General Assembly will show the same reasonableness as members of the Council, and these absurd attempts will be rejected. The fact of the publication of the yet another one, Secretary General's report on the implementation of 2231, is yet another illustration of snapback-free reality, and it shows the document that the only state which is stating the opposite is the United States. The other states think that these claims are without any justification and therefore not something that can bring in their wake any kind of a political, legal, or practical consequences. We welcome, in particular, the appeal to fully support and use a procurement channel. The channel remains being a major confidence-building measure within the context of 2231. We note with satisfaction that the Secretary General in his report expresses regret having to do with the United States withdrawal from JCPOA and regret as regards the future steps along these lines and call them as running counter to the goals of 2231. It is also important that Antonio Guterres concludes that this action by the American side can negatively impact on the implementation of the resolution by other participants. Nonetheless, the Secretary General's report is still something that we cannot call a fully balanced document. And the problem remains, it is the same as before. You cannot call on one side to return to full compliance without doing it for the other side. All the more so since we all understand that the non-compliance by Iran with their commitments is a direct reaction to the destructive and provocative actions by the United States. And the Iranian side had warned about such consequences. We have this in paragraph 26 of JCPOA. We regret that the UN leadership once again was not brave enough to clearly call on the United States to fully and unconditionally return to compliance with 2231, JCPOA, and rescind all of the steps that were made in their violation. For the second time in a row, we are struck by the cynical wording the report used when it comes to the killing of Iranians. There is no word of condemnation of this or mentioning the potential consequences they can have. There's nothing on that in the document. As was earlier the case with Qasem Soleimani, there is no regret expressed as regards the death of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. It only states that his name was on sanctioned lists, and this can only be characterized as faint-heartedness. It's also very difficult for us to find an explanation of the sudden interest by the Secretary General to the IAEA activity on Iran, in particular when it comes to the monitoring of the implementation of the Comprehensive Agreement on the Safeguards. We didn't used to say this in reports, and in general, as far as we know, we had the understanding that the Vienna issues are to be discussed in Vienna, and that in New York we do not have sufficient expertise to do that. Mr. President, as you know very well, Russia for several years have been calling on the Secretariat to strictly abide by its administrative and technical mandate when it comes to 2231 implementation. We are not supporting any kind of an investigation under its aegis, nor do we support any other non-transparent activities by the Secretariat behind the backs of member states. Members of the Secretariat simply have no authority to do any of those things. And we would like to take our American colleagues into account who are trying to overlook this fact. The current report had shed a light on how futile it is to find violations on behalf of Iran of the Annex B to Resolution 2231, which talks about the special procedure for the arms supplies into or out of the Islamic Republic of Iran, as well as in the section of missiles. We would like to underscore that, once again, in this regard, that attempts to present Iran as a source of all ills in the region, as a threat to the region's security, do not have any justification behind them. If you do not provoke the country, if you do not escalate tension around it, then you will have considerably fewer problems in the region as well. We are grateful to the Belgian coordinator for the efforts he has been making to organize the 2231 format work. And during their period, the period during their activity was far from easy. But the Belgian diplomacy has acquitted itself very well. It showed how serious it was when discharging its responsibility of coordinator, who is in charge of making sure that the format work is strictly factual. We do know that as regards the current report, the compromise was not easy to obtain, and we cannot say that the final version is a fully balanced one. For it to be fully balanced, the text should have had a fuller, a fairer reflection of the Tehran position. And we do hope that the future coordinator will take this into account and will strictly follow the honest broker line and provide parties equal opportunity to express their opinion in the report. Colleagues, we do have in my country a saying according to which breaking things is a lot easier than putting them together. And over these 6 months, we have seen with our own eyes how fragile is the balance of interests and balances which underpins the nuclear deal of 2015. So far, our joint efforts have resulted in maintaining it, and we do hope that the American side will ultimately make the right conclusions from everything that's happened. No one has asked the United States to act as a world policeman. And the attempts to do that today looks anachronistic today, as does a reckless and arrogant policy of exerting unilateral pressure, which ultimately will work against the side which is trying to pursue it. Therefore, the most logical step on behalf of the United States now would be a full and unconditional return to full compliance with JCPOA, of course, without any kind of preconditions. And we do expect that the new American administration realizes that and will undertake the right steps in this direction in the very near future. The whole world will stand to benefit from this. We also pay due tribute to the Tehran statement that they stand ready to return to JCPOA implementation in full compliance as soon as this is done by the United States. Of course, the situation in the Persian Gulf cannot be seen exclusively through the JCPOA prism. Steps are needed to increase trust for neighbors in the region, preventing crises and bringing down the risk of armed confrontation. We're therefore putting forward the idea of regional dialogue on security issues in the Persian Gulf. In October, during our Security Council presidency, the Security Council had an open debate on this issue, and we saw there that there was a demand to find the real ways of stabilizing the situation in the Persian Gulf, that it exists, and it's on the part of basically all actors. I'd like to underscore yet once again that the issue of regional security is a separate issue, which goes beyond the framework of the JCPOA discussion, but this doesn't take anything away from its importance. And we do hope that we will be able to continue discussing this issue in the very near future, and not in general, but aiming for specific solutions. The region of the Persian Gulf, we think, is ripe for pragmatic and sensible discussion on the part of all interested parties, and we, on our part, stand ready to make sure that the dialogue is launched as quickly as possible. Mr. President, I would like to, similar to my colleagues, use this opportunity and thank the delegations of the 5 countries who are going to be leaving the Security Council on the 1st of January, and thank them for the joint work. We are grateful to you for the contribution you have made to the subsidiary organs of the Security Council. It is unfortunate that we have not been able to meet in person, because this is definitely something that warrants it. We wish you every success to you in all of your endeavors, and will cooperate in the General Assembly and other UN bodies. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement and the kind words to the E5 as they exit the Security Council.